Hello, everyone. So tonight we're going to have an intimate gathering. And I think about in the community centers, we talk about how, yeah, we can pack a house, we can do this, we can do that, but that's not always the most impactful event that happens. It's sometimes the ones that have 10 people, 5 people, or just a faculty member, an administrator, and a few students. And so I want to thank you all for coming. So my name is Jan Barker Alexander. I'm an Assistant Vice Provost of Student Affairs. I have been here a total of 26 years at Stanford. And what I can say is that the evolution of us has been amazing to be a part of and to watch. Is my microphone still on? Yes, okay. Felt like I got dimmed a little bit. I just wasn't sure, right? And so being here today, representing the Centers for Equity, Community, and Leadership. Many of you know us as the community centers. And so these centers are the Asian American Activity Center that we know as ACUBC, the Black Community Services Center that's been called the Black House since 1969, El Centro Chicano y Latino, which we call Centro, the Marcaz Resource Center, the Native American Cultural Center, but as we know, NAC, the NAC, QSR, Queer Student Resources, and the WCC, the Women's Community Center, make up this 7 of the Centers for Equity, Community, and Leadership. Now, with that being said, why are we here today? I think that my colleagues in Student Affairs, I see that we're joined by Vice Provost of Student Affairs, Dr. Susie Brubaker-Cole. Many of us have engagements with students where students are thinking they're not doing enough. And I think I can probably get an amen from all the students, that you always think you're not doing enough. And I remember talking to a student one time. She tutored in East Palo Alto. She said to me, you know what, Jan? I need to do something that's making an impact. And I was like, but why don't you think tutoring this one student is not making an impact? Well, I just need to be doing something bigger. I need to be making change. Why don't you think you are making change and assisting change and an evolution of change for this student? And I think students, you all have thought that to yourselves as well. We, Stanford, the world, TikTok, whatever you want to call it, okay? It's always about scale. It's got to be federal level. And I was talking to Dr. Lerone Martin a minute ago, and I said, you know, this is really what I want to say because this is how I feel, right? When I was talking to this student who was talking about education, I said things at the federal level, it depends on the kind of impact that you're trying to make. And I said to her, No Child Left Behind left some children behind. So why must it always be at this level? And so here we are today with Changemakers. We are here to interrogate scale and scope, how we think about that. We are here to interrogate who chooses who is quote unquote worthy to be seen as someone making change. Is it really about how many likes you have on Instagram? Is it how clever your TikTok is? Now I will say I was watching some TikToks last night that were quite clever that I sent to a few people. I will say that, right? But at the end of the day, and especially when we think about servant leadership also, the question is, at what cost? At what cost to self? Because when you are people who work from a place of serving and helping and assisting, can I get an amen that we know how that can be draining? And so the question is, at what cost? So as we move into this program tonight, I have to say why we're here. I said why. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the how. And I want to thank Yvette Lee Bowser. Snaps, I know. Yvette Lee Bowser, class of 1987. Yvette Lee Bowser, we know her, most of us, and those of us in the audience, and they know your work, Yvette, even though when were y'all born? 2000. Oh, even though they were born in 2000. I know, as we all grasp, right? But what you need to know, for those of you who don't know, Yvette Lee Bowser, at age of 28, the Philly-born, Cali-bred creator, Yvette Lee Bowser, became the first African-American woman to develop her own primetime series. Do we realize how significant that is? The first to develop her own primetime series. Living Single became the blueprint for many series. And let me just, I'm gonna mention in a minute, okay. But when networks like NBC used it, they used it to create Friends. This was the first one, okay, was Living Single. Bowser catapulted into being a creator of color, but she created a creator of color to another level. The goal is always to show the spectrum of blackness and beauty and intelligence, and that's all wrapped up in these characters, said Bowser. I want the humor to allow society to see our humanity. Bowser's ability to tell our stories and showcase a range of Black experiences is seen with her work through writing, producing A Different World, and serving as executive producer of Dear White People and Blackish, and working on the Star's original Run the World. What I want to say about Yvette, because I've had a chance to get to know Yvette, Yvette is the type of servant leader that when she walks into the room, she takes everybody else in the room with her. And that is what being a servant leader is all about. So to Yvette Lee Bowser, who I know is watching us, I want to say thank you on behalf of the Centers for Equity, Community, and Leadership, because you are why we are here today. Now, as we move into what is servant leadership, I have a brother, Dr. Lerone Martin, who is the Associate Professor of Religious Studies and the Martin Luther King Jr. Centennial Chair and Director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute here at Stanford. Martin is the author of the award-winning book, Preaching on Wax, The Phonograph and the Making of Modern African American Religion. The book received the 2015 First Book Award by the American Society of Church History. In support of his research, Martin has received a number of nationally recognized fellowships, including the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. I'm excited for this new chapter for the King Institute, and I have to give a shout out to Dr. Claiborne Carson, the first, bringing the papers here. But I also know that it took a team to build what Lerone is coming into. So Dr. Carson, I say thank you, but to Tanisha Armstrong, I say thank you. To Regina Covington, I say thank you. And I am missing one other person right now. It's on the tip of my tongue, but whoever it is, I apologize. But I know, and I think we're gonna find out today from the people on stage, it takes a village. It takes a team to bring about greatness. So with that being said, I now will turn it over to Dr. Lerone Martin.
Thank you for those wonderful words, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And you know, when we think about servant leadership, there are a number of names that we could reflect upon and think about. But there is no better name to think about than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And there are many things that could be said about Martin King, about his intelligence, his brilliance, his PhD, all the awards, the Nobel Peace Prize. But the thing that really sticks out the most is his heart for servanthood and being a servant. And in his last address that he gave at Ebenezer Baptist Church in February 4th, 1968, 2 months before an assassin's bullet took him from us, King reflected on servant leadership. And he said that what was so wonderful about being a servant, according to the Christian tradition, is that being a servant meant that everybody could be great. That you didn't have to have a PhD to be great. You didn't have to have your subject and verb agree to be great. But all you had to have was a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love in order to be great.
Can you say that again?
You're trying to take me to church, huh? All you need is a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. And that is the mark of greatness, being a servant. And so today what we have are three individuals that I'm so excited to hear more about today, who have really demonstrated themselves that they've taken the preparation with their mind through their Stanford education, but also they have a heart full of grace, and they have a soul generated by love in order to serve others. And they recognize that change happens on many different levels, but most importantly, it happens in the local community. And so I'm so excited to hear from these three individuals today. And I want to share with you that I'm excited also with the MLK Institute that we'll be partnering with events like this, building upon the wonderful foundation that's been laid by those who came before me, and with Regina and Tanisha, who are still working there with me. And we are excited to partner for any types of events like this that further the legacy of Martin King, that further highlight those who have a heart full of grace and soul generated by love. So thank you and welcome to this wonderful event, and I look forward to learning from our servant leaders today. Thanks for having me.
So I would like to ask those who will be on the podium with me to come on and join us, okay? Michael, you will be at the end, and Gina and Nicole here. But before that, we have to hear from a student. And when I tell you, when you hear from this student, you will remember this student forever. And when we think about servant leadership, I was talking to her about a bio, and then I read what she was going to read. And all I'm going to say is, when she speaks, that is her bio, that is who she is, and represents what we will be talking about tonight. So Miriam Khalil, will you please join us on stage now?
Make sure the mic's actually in front of me. We live in an era of change. We use our minds, our voices, even our Twitters to uncage ourselves from the standards of the past. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariam Khalil, and I'm a junior studying human biology with honors in international security. I come from a long line of revolutionaries, dating back to the early 1900s, when my great-great-grandfather was a key leader in the Libyan resistance against colonial Italy. This resistance eventually culminated into the first republic in the Arab world, the Tripolitania Republic, and subsequently into full Libyan independence in 1951, when King Idris came to power. Many years later, the king was overthrown by a low-ranking military officer by the name of Muammar al-Gaddafi, resulting in one of the longest dictatorships in history, a tumultuous 42 years under which my grandfather was forcefully taken from his home and incarcerated for 3 years in solitary confinement, under the impression he would be sentenced to death due to his political beliefs and power. Thankfully, due to a team of lawyers, my grandfather was released. This, however, was not the case for many. People's lives were uprooted, political activists executed, and families divided. As a young activist, I have engaged in many spaces. Being a dual citizen, I've worked in Libya during the pandemic, where I met with the Center for Disease Control and worked on vaccine rollout. I also worked on women's computer science education efforts, even though I'm terrible at computer science. To Missouri, where I started a movement against my school district for their racism, xenophobia, and lack of response to student issues. And further, I organized with an abolitionist group in Kansas City to end police violence. To right here at Stanford, where I work on a range of issues from decarceration to Palestinian resistance efforts to Muslim student issues. Throughout my journey, I have learned quite a few lessons. One, There is no such thing as little change, just change at different scales and levels. 2, change is not immediate, and we must have the patience for progress and not the greed for instantaneous change. The campaign against my school district continues today as new student leaders propel the advocacy of past students. 3, never let the oppressor set the standards for what change looks like. Our communities are better than that, and we should recognize and support all activist efforts. 4, servant leadership is beautiful and gives me and so many others much joy and purpose, but it should not come at the cost of your mental health. During the campaign against my school district, #OurStruggleLSR7, I felt immense social pressure from the number of DMs I was receiving and the number of news outlets who wanted to interview me. I was shocked by the number and severity of the allegations people had come forward with against the school district and some of its teachers. I felt this immense burden to take down the school district on my own, which leads me to 5. This idea that if you don't do it, no one else will is bogus and rooted in individualistic society's notions of community. As a student leader, as an activist, as someone who dreams for a better world, when I saw this event, I was excited. It made me interrogate how I look at change, something that every change maker needs to do every once in a while. الزمن لا يغير, الزمن يكشف. This Arabic proverb loosely translates to, time does not change, time reveals. I like to think that making changes in our world is more about time unveiling the ever-evolving reality of our world. Don't be afraid of becoming something else in your activism. Don't be afraid of morphing into someone completely different. Be excited to unfold the fabric of your identity, to reveal yourself, and to find your purpose. Thank you.
Woo! I told you the truth, didn't I? Yes, yes. When I read it, I got tears. I got tears. So, hi everybody. Hi. So, you all know the drill because most of you know me well. Name, class year. I want to know where you lived, your major, maybe the one you started out with and then the one you ended with, okay. Exactly. Then I also, somebody has their alarm on, which is fine, I get it. I also would like for you to give like one thing about Stanford that you loved while you were here, okay? And I'm gonna start with you, Gina.
Okay. I don't know if my mic is on.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Gina McGuire. I'm from the Big Island of Hawaii on Hilo side, if anyone's been. I grew up on a farm in a very rural Hawaiian community, and I majored in international relations. I graduated in class of 2017. I left a little bit early, 2016, but class of 2017, and I always wanted to do environmental science, and so I ended up in the IR department doing like environmental policy kind of stuff, and yeah, I think that's
your journey?
Very short intro. I'm back in Hawaii now again.
Okay. And where did you live when you were on campus?
Oh, I started at Flomo and then I did 2 years at Muekma. And the thing that I loved about Stanford the most was the Native community, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
All right, Nicole?
My name is Nicole Sandoval. I am class of 2004, the oldest person on this, of the panelists. I am from Northeast LA, Highland Park, Cypress Park, hey. And I studied hum bio. My concentration was education and development of urban adolescents. And I lived in Unipro my freshman year. I was on staff at El Centro for 4 years. And yeah, I stayed with the same major. And is there anything else? That was it. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Michael?
Good evening. My name is Michael Tubbs. I'm from Stockton, California. I lived in Ujima for 3 of the 4 years. And lived in Bradner sophomore year, and it was the first year Bradner wasn't all frosh. It was a public service dorm. So I thought it'd be cool to live with other public servants, which is not what it was. Anyway, I enjoyed my time in Bradner. My major was in comparative studies in race and ethnicity. I came in as a political science major, but I realized after taking Intro to American Government that I was more interested in how the institution impacted people than like the institution. Like the thing, like I was so frustrated in class, like why does this matter? Like what about the people? And I realized there was majors that talked about people and folks, and it was super interdisciplinary, which was great. Then I co-terminal master's degree in the School of Education and Policy, Organization, Leadership Studies, because before I thought I was going to run for city council, I wanted to be a superintendent. I went to like a school system.
Okay.
Favorite? I think, man, my favorite part of Stanford, wow. Well, back in my day, Tressiter would have the best parties, particularly my freshman and sophomore year. And then like the off-campus Greeks would come, so it was like a different flavor. And there would be they have blinds here, and you knew you had a good time at the party when all the blinds were like on the floor. So I missed the social life at Stanford because I didn't think there would be one. I was pleasantly surprised at how much fun I was able to have while I was a student here.
So you mentioned you didn't expect that there would be one. You also didn't really come to do all the freshman things, like people calling your name, because you thought what type of students were here?
Yeah, so I was the last person to move into my dorm, despite living an hour and a half away. And part of it's because I am always late, but part of it was also I was scared a little bit. I didn't have the best experience in high school. Obviously did well, but didn't really enjoy my classes or my classmates or my teachers. And I thought, since that was an elite program, that Stanford would be more the same. So I was like really dreading spending another 4 years isolated, or being told I was better than people who came from my neighborhood or better than people who looked like me. And also thought Stanford was just going to be a bunch of weird people who I did not want to hang out with, would not want to speak to. I didn't think that was going to happen. So pleasantly surprised, but was super scared and nervous, and also had real, before all, you guys have all the fancy language now. Like, we didn't have imposter syndrome back then. Like, Claude still was just doing research on stereotype threat. But I realize now that I just felt that I would get here and fail, and get here and not do well, and get here and prove everyone who said I shouldn't have got in, make them look right, and that was just a lot of to carry in as 18-year-olds. So I missed all of the welcome festivities. It wasn't until my senior year when I was on staff in Ujima where I realized that it's red carpets rolled out when you move in. Like, people say your name, there's dancing, there's music. When I got in, everyone's at convocation, so it was empty. It was just me in the dorm. And it was, yes, kind of sad.
Don't feel sad. Don't feel sad. He did all right. He did all right. He did all right. So, speaking of you did all right, you have a book, you know, people know the bio, right? So, I want to ask Gina, when you got this letter, talk a little bit about that reaction.
I cried. I feel like a lot of the work that I do, you know, it is at the more local scale. I'm still doing my PhD, so I feel like I'm still in that process of becoming. I have a lot of things that I'm working towards that I'm still, you know. So to get that letter it's very humbling, and I'm very honored to be here with all of you, but it's nice to have that kind of, I don't want to say recognition, but it means a lot to know that, like, my family sees what I'm doing or the community sees what I'm doing, but then somebody from the outside knows what I'm doing. That was like, what? Like, that is the nicest thing. It was,
So talk a little bit about what you're doing.
So I'm a PhD student, or candidate, I guess. I finished my exams, and that was, and so my research is at a broader scale, but putting indigenous definitions of well-being into how we do environmental science, and specifically I'm looking at how to do that with Hawaiian, Oiwi, well-being, and putting that into understanding the coastline where I'm working at with a very rural Hawaiian community. So doing that, and by doing that, you realize that you can't just write this theory or do the research. We're doing a coastal forest restoration project. I have a couple mentees, I don't know what the right word is, interns.
I wouldn't have been a mentee, I'm just going to tell you right now. As soon as you asked me to pick, I wouldn't have shown up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then I also write creatively about OED worlds and trying to put that out in the world.
You say put out in the world, but don't you have a book that you...
I have a short story in a book published and 2 poems that are out. So, yeah, the very beginning.
So I asked you earlier about when, based on what you do, the research that you're doing, 20, 25 years from now, when little children are walking on the beach in Hawaii, what do you want them to be experiencing that is based in the work that you want to do?
That's a really beautiful question. It's a really gorgeous question. I think for me, and it's not just about Native people, but non-Native people, all of us, making spaces for us to have relationship-based and kin-based relationships with non-human persons, right, in the environment. So changing the way that we're thinking about, for me, ocean spaces, but all environmental spaces as not something that you just use, right? Or you set up a conservation area where people can't go, right? But trying to bring back practice, cultural practice, or even if you're not Native, right, you can have a relationship with a place. So kind of changing the mindset, I think, on when that kid is walking on the beach, right? They have a purpose for being there, or the way that they're engaging is gonna well, I don't know, I'm gonna change the way everybody thinks, right? But, changing the systems for how we think about our environmental spaces, yeah.
Okay. Nicole, so you got the letter and thought...
The letter
to be on this panel.
Oh my goodness.
I thought you were talking about the admissions letter this whole time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
What are you talking about? Okay.
I'm talking about the letter to be on the panel.
Oh gosh, I was so in shock. I was humbled. This to be invited to come back to Stanford, even it's just such an honor, and I just was in shock, Jan. I really was. But at the same time, I feel like it's just confirmation that when you do what you love, you don't have to worry about the rest of it. I mean, it was that. It was like, yeah, because my path was not exactly straightforward, right? Like a bio major. So I think when you come to Stanford, there's a lot of pressure to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, something very specific, right? I've even heard stories of people being told by their parents, well, if you want to be a teacher, why go to Stanford, right? So I came here thinking, I ended up, I wasn't pre-med, but I was bio. I knew that I liked science, I knew that I liked people, but I wasn't pre-med. So when I graduated, it was very confusing for me. And actually at that time, so I don't think I shared what I do yet. I'm a nurse practitioner. Does anybody know what that is? Okay.
Heroes
for
of
the
the
people
pandemic.
who don't know.
Okay, for the people who don't know, a nurse practitioner is somebody that has a master's or doctorate degree in nursing, and they prescribe medications, they interpret labs, they basically become your primary care provider. So in essence, it's an alternative way to kind of have, not control, but sort of like control over somebody's plan of care, like in the healthcare space. So it's very popular now. Like nurse practitioners are in demand now, but when I was going to Stanford 20 years ago, I didn't even know there was an alternative to being a physician. And so I don't even think Stanford has a nursing program still. No. Okay. So anyway, it was and so my path was sort of like, I graduated from Stanford, and then I wasn't exactly pre-med, I didn't know what I wanted to do after graduation. I got into real estate because the real estate market was really booming back then, kind of like it is now, and you didn't have to do anything or know anything really to make money in real estate back then. And then the market crashed, and then I realized I really don't like real estate that much because it was really money-based. For me, it was only money-based, and I'm a mission-driven person, so that only lasts for a certain amount of time, right? And so I decided, I did do a lot of sort of healthcare, like my externship in HumBio was actually shadowing a pediatrician through the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital who ran a mobile clinic for homeless teens in the Bay Area. So I already was connected to this desire to be of service. So fast forward here I am a nurse, and then I become a nurse practitioner, and I do work with the homeless now. That's what I do. So I do something called street medicine, and that's when we go out into the community, we go where people are, tents, parks, under bridges, backpack, and we try to meet people where they are, literally and figuratively. So it's quite a different role in healthcare. A lot of people don't even know that that exists, but I love what I do. I feel like I get to use my brain and my heart every single day. And so it was an honor to, like Gina said, to be recognized for that, even when I didn't expect it at all. So, yeah.
So here's what I want to say. I remember talking to Michael, and I was telling him about what you do. And there was this article in the LA Times that just, I don't even get the LA Times, but on some Facebook or something, it showed up in my feed. And I remember, I think your reaction was like, what? She does what? Oh, I don't need to be on the panel. Like, just the amazing work that both of you, it is about evolution, it is about growth. I am not gonna make you cry because I'm looking at you right now, okay? So Michael Tubbs, when you think about lessons of social change and lessons of servant leadership, give me 2 lessons.
Just 2? Well, I think the 2 that might be most applicable, particularly for the students, are, and I'm sure you know that, both of you guys know this in your work, particularly working with like real people, and is change moves at the speed of trust. So before, you're not gonna be able to get anything done, even if you have, because I think we're trained here to have the right answer, but in the real world, it's not enough to be right. You have to have the trust of folks, and then you can get something done. And that's something I didn't understand until I was on city council, and meeting in like living rooms, and in community centers, and in gymnasiums, and saying, I know we have to do this. But they're not realizing the amount of time and trust that need to be built for people to believe like, okay, you're the person that can help deliver that. And I would say number 2, and I think particularly for Stanford students, your trajectory is always one of like winning or always one of success. But when you're really, like the status quo has a lot of friends. Like the status quo is not the way it is because no one likes it. It's the way it is because there's a lot of entrenched interest. There are a lot of people, even people who are harmed by it, who are very comfortable with the status quo. So go in knowing that change is not linear. Go in knowing that progress comes at a price. And go into any endeavor knowing that your purpose is not tied to your position. And I think the second lesson I didn't understand until I lost re-election in 2020 and lost it after a 90-minute HBO documentary about the great work we were doing. Lost it after everyone being excited about the basic income work we were doing. Lost it after reducing homicides, reducing shootings. Lost it after doing what I thought was required to be successful. I remember losing, and then you have that moment like, well, was it worth it? Like, what's the point? It's changed real. It was just a reminder that no, your purpose and your position are different, and your position, your title, your degree is a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself if you're actually trying to make some change. If you're not making some change, don't listen to what I'm saying. They don't apply to you. But if you're making change, I think those are the two biggest lessons.
So I was going to ask you about the at what cost, right? And I want you to dig into your feelings when you lost. I was mad. I mean, I'm just going to say I was mad. I went on and I read the whatever that thing in Stockton with all these falsehoods about you, right? And so I was just like, how could he's leaving them in a surplus? I'm confused why this happened. What were your feelings, Michael? Like, this is this place of vulnerability that I know community centers, we lead from that kind of place.
Luckily, I've been in counseling, so I can talk about feelings better than I used to be able to. No, I think the biggest, so the first was like, it's funny, the initial feelings were actually feelings tied to ego. So first it was like shame and embarrassment, because I was getting text messages not just from like Stockton people, but from like the governor, from Vice President Harris. Like, what happened? Like, what's going on? Are you okay? And it's being very embarrassed, like, oh my gosh, I let all these people down, I failed, I wasn't enough, I was deficient somehow, that maybe this wasn't what I was supposed to do. And then it got to like anger. I was mad, like, how dare you? I did all this, I did all that, we did all this, like, why would you? And then I was sad. It was like almost like a feeling of grief as if someone had passed. But I think it's because I and Jan will tell you, from the time I was an 18-year-old freshman on campus, I was always talking about Stockton. Every paper was about something in Stockton, or how we can make Stockton better. It was something that I was deeply passionate about, and it's deeply it was very, very personal. So that sense of grief and loss, like, oh my gosh. But then after a little bit, I was kind of not resigned to the fact, but it reminded me of my senior year when I was applying for fellowships. And at the time, and this is again a dumb thing, but at the time, a lot of mentors had told me that I was destined to be a Rhodes Scholar. That's what Michael Tubbs is going to be. So I remember applying and then the campus interview killed it. They were like, oh my gosh, surest thing since Cory Booker, Rhodes Scholar, Michael Tubbs. And then not getting the fellowship and feeling again the same feelings, but also realizing that if I had got that fellowship, I wouldn't have ran for city council. So I think, in terms to answer your question, so after being reminded of that, I thought, well, wow, I didn't plan to be on mayor, I didn't plan to be city council. I'm really passionate about structural violence. I'm really passionate about the opportunity structure of this country. Maybe there's another route, maybe there's something else for me to do. And then really having the calm or the chill to say, you know what, I don't know what's next. And I still got 2 months of this job with these people who now piss me off. But we're still in the middle of a pandemic, so folks still need help. And then just really being resigned to the fact that what's next is different. It doesn't be better, but what's next is different, and what's next is for me. So that was super helpful. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll be quiet, is that particularly for people of faith or with a spiritual practice, I remember in the height of the pandemic and arguing with people about masks and arguing with people about rental assistance. I remember being really tired. I remember literally praying and saying, you know what, God, I love it here, but if you want me to do something, I don't want you to keep me here because you think I want to be here. If you ready for me to go, I'm ready to go. But I thought that meant I would get a promotion. Or I would get, I thought Kamala Harris might be vice president, maybe I get appointed to her seat, so God, So then when I lost, I was reminded of that, and I was like, oh my gosh, so be careful what you pray for. Because you'll get an answer, but it might not be in the way you want. But looking back now, everything makes so much more sense, and I'm so happy. But no, losing is tough, and the underline is particularly when we're talking about change, we're talking about like 400 years of a system built on white supremacy, built on land theft, built off genocide, built off human trafficking, where people were literally enslaving their children, right? So that's like some deep evil. And when you go against that, you're gonna, of course there's gonna be a reaction. Of course there's gonna be a bounce back. And I wish I had known, I wish I had got in more clear-eyed about how it wasn't all going to be documentaries and good articles. That there was like people going to be pissed that you're trying to change something, which sounds so stupid now, but literally as a 25-year-old, I had no idea. I was like, no, this is good. Like everyone's mad about this. We're going to fix it. And it's like, no, people may be mad, but they be mad at you for trying to fix it. So just go in knowing that.
So I want to ask Gina. She's talking about giving advice and going in knowing it. So as a freshman, right, and we were talking earlier, Karen and I, and you started smiling immediately when I mentioned Karen Beesman and the NAC, and I know this was very special for you, but was your path immediate? And in that path to where you are, I understand that you were a Frosh Fellow, and that might have begun a spark around research. Talk to me about what that was like, and also the potential uncertainty of like, I don't know if I really want to keep doing that.
Yeah, so I've always wanted to do, I grew up on a farm, and I say a farm loosely, but my parents reforest. Basically, they have 42 acres that they're trying to take from invaded alien forest and turn it back into a native canopy, and they grow this plant, Miley, which is a rare endemic species. Anyway, so my parents have always been like, they're conservationists and cultural practitioners. So when they always also taught, it was almost like if you were doing homework, you weren't pulling weeds, if that makes sense, on the farm. So for me, like, education was kind of my way to not be farm labor, if that makes sense. But I really admire, my parents are my inspiration, and so I knew I wanted to do something in conservation. And so I came in, I was thinking about earth systems, and I wanted a double major originally in earth systems and international relations, doing environmental policy. And then I did the Frosh Fellows, so the NAC puts on a research program, and I looked at monk seal, which are endemic and super endangered. They're critter cam footage. But the really interesting thing about that fellowship experience was thinking about monk seals. There's a little bit of controversy with fishermen thinking that they're like an invasive species, but they've actually been in the islands longer than people have. So anyway, there was this really interesting dialogue between local subsistence-based communities and this highly endangered species. And that was what was most interesting to me. And so I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do work with subsistence practitioners who understand the environment in different ways. And so my environmental conservation-based thing from that moment was like, it doesn't make sense without indigenous people, and it doesn't make sense without subsistence practitioners. So then my whole thing, I was like, I'll just focus on that environmental policy thing, and then I've followed that through. But yeah, the NAC really, anything you do, indigenous peoples can and should be at the forefront of that conversation. And so that really altered my path, I think. But. And
so has your dad bothered you still not
what's up?
Pulling the weeds that you were talking about earlier?
Oh, yeah, that's the other thing. So I struggled at Stanford a lot. I was homesick all the time. And that's why I graduated early. And I went back to the farm. I'm living on the farm now. And it's funny that, the thing that you think you're maybe escaping is the thing that you really belong to, or you feel committed to, right? And so not that you don't appreciate it till it's, until it's gone, but you do, right? And so I realized whatever research, whatever I was doing, it needed to be there, and I needed to be getting my hands dirty and pulling weed. It had to go back to that.
You had to go back to that.
Yeah.
So when you think about servant leadership, you being a servant leadership, who are you serving and to what end?
This is gonna sound super cheesy, so
okay.
I apologize, but I'll tell this in like a story base, but my doctoral work is in a rural Hawaiian community called Kalapana, and it's downslope of Kilauea volcano, so that area has been inundated by lava, but the people that are down there have persisted for many, since there were first people in Hawaii in that area, and they caretake of their resources. And so my parents grew up, they moved before I was born out of the area. But so I wanted to go back into the area where my parents grew up, where my dad had, I'm trying to think of limpets, you gather shellfish kind of thing, and went hunting and fishing and had this really vibrant lifestyle growing up. And so I wanted to reconnect with that place. And I remember on the first day that I was doing my field work, and I had my 2 interns, both of who are Native Hawaiian, but there were 2 old uncles, and so we were kind of getting organized, getting all our stuff together, and they motioned for me to come over, and I was like, hey uncle, what's up? And they're like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, we're doing some plant surveys. And they're like, okay. And I was like, if it's okay with you guys, because what I tried to explain my dissertation. I'm like, I want to talk about Hawaiian wellness and how that's aina or land-based. And so talking about Kalapana. And they're like, oh, you're John McGuire's daughter, yeah? And I was like, yeah. So they knew who I was before I started talking. And I was like, does that sound like something that you guys might be interested in? I didn't say it like that. I don't know how I said it, and they were like, oh yeah, sounds good. And that sounds really small, but it's that feeling of entering a place and then having the people already know who you are, them knowing your parents and your parents' parents, and having that expectation of trust going in, and then having that expected and then earning it. And so I think for me, it's in service to the places that have fed my ancestors and to my ancestors. And so when I get that feeling where it's when you're doing the right thing, you can feel it kind of. And so I kind of chase that feeling of my parents' parents, when they're proud, then I know I'm doing okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Nicole, I right now have a feeling that there are things in your head that you want to say, right? I just have this feeling, right? Based on some of the conversations that we've had, right? And so when you think about servant leadership, how do you see yourself fitting in that? And also, we talked about your family earlier, and your nurse, so how do you sort of put all of that together?
Oh, gosh. So what's the first part of that question?
Okay, so how do you see yourself fitting in this space of servant leadership? Let me put it that way.
I think that, I guess to start, just the nature of my job, it's a very unpredictable environment when you go out on the streets, right? It's not a mobile van where we're in a van and people come into my van. This is we're on foot. So for me, when people hear about what we do, and just to give you guys a context, I'm never by myself, okay? Safety is always a top priority for us. It's a multidisciplinary team. So there's a medical part, there's substance use specialists, there's clinical social workers, and there's housing experts, right? So we're addressing all of that and just seeing what people are open to, right? We cannot make anybody do anything they're not ready to do, but we can provide things, we can inform them of what their options are, see what they're interested in. So I think when people hear about what we do, they're like, I would never do that thing. Like, I would never do that. And I think when we talk about servant leadership and the cost, I have some family members, some friends that would actually rather me not be out on the streets every single day, you know? They're worried for my safety. But I'm not, I think that, so there's a part that can be sometimes involving like physical danger, and we don't like to talk about that. But if you're radical, and if you are radical and you're willing to go where you feel led, sometimes you're going to enter some spaces that are not necessarily safe, and you have to be willing. And safety comes from physical danger, but it also can be financial risk and things. Like, I think I would, if I were to say anything about being a servant leader, it's just being willing to learning how to trust yourself right now. Like, at 40, almost 40, I'm starting to feel that I'm learning how to trust myself. And if I would have learned that and started to learn that at a young age, and I think like what you alluded to, that there's language now around these things that there wasn't when I was 20, right? So learning how to trust yourself, learning how to know what you want, not what your parents want of you. Learning what your holy discontent is. What is your holy discontent? What is the thing that really you would fight for? Like you said, you're always talking about Stockton. Like, I always, trying to figure those things out. So I would say, like, that's where I fit in servant. And it's also, servant leadership is also about never seeing yourself as above anybody. Like, some of my patients, and a lot of them, have substance use disorders, but having compassion for people, seeing things through like trauma-informed lens instead of a judgment lens, that's really important when you're serving people. Seeing yourself, like, how can I be like them, or how could I be close to being like them? If I don't have my social support, like, I could maybe be homeless tomorrow, or have I ever coped with something in a negative way? Maybe I didn't start using heroin, but have I ever done that in my life? And I think, has anybody ever coped with something in a negative way? I think
just yesterday.
Yeah,
just yesterday.
Exactly. Just yesterday. Exactly. So it's like seeing yourself as equal is the way to lead. And loving people, and people know if you're authentic or not. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. So I'm going to end and let people start asking questions, okay? And so I'm opening it up to the audience to ask questions now, and you can just stand up and ask your question, or even if it's a statement at this point. There we go. Hi.
Hi. Hi. Thank you guys so much for talking to us today. This has been like the highlight of the day. I'm very excited for the rest of the week now. But I think my question right now is mainly for you, Nicole. I'm Kayla. Hi.
Hi, Kayla.
And where are you from? Where are you from? What's your major?
I'm from Brooklyn, New York, the best city. I'm a senior here studying political science and data science, and I often say it's because of exactly what you were saying before, of like, I feel like poli-sci is very abstract, like we're talking about systems and like the status quo, but like I feel like with data science, I'm able to like look at things more concretely, right? Like able to think of solutions, not just what the problem is. So today, at this point, I'm very interested in mutual aid. I do that with one of my besties right here, Mohammed. So really just like, I loved what you guys were saying about like looking at the power that we can have like on a community level, right? On an individual level. And so I wanted to ask you about like, especially your work, like I know we said it doesn't always have to be scaled, right? And I agree with that. Like I'm very much into the like community level work, but I think of like what you were saying about we have like a multidisciplinary team walking around the neighborhood, right? Imagine if that was happening like in all neighborhoods, right? Like people going around and giving access to, you know, these key things. Like when we talk about abolition, like I feel like that is like an important prerequisite, right? So I wonder about like one, just what you think about, not to ask it, but yeah, what you think about the scalability of your work and like what it could look like in communities if more of us were using like a system like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kayla, thanks. So I think that if in LA County in particular, this has been rolled out in a lot of different areas. And I believe to provide services to people where they are, especially as it relates to the homeless crisis, I think is critical. There's so many barriers to access, both internal barriers for the person and external, transportation issues, you know, a lot of different things. So I think that it's massively important. I actually think that when I'm in conversations around like how do we help the homeless crisis, and I think one of the things we need to add into the big picture, or the multidisciplinary team, are on-site psychiatrists. We do have some psychiatric nurse practitioners. We have, you know, family medicine people like myself, but we really do need some specialists out on the field to administer medications and things like that. I think that would be extremely helpful. So, but yeah, I mean, but the thing is, people cost money, lots of money. And so then we're talking about how people are spending dollars, and that goes above my pay scale, so I don't know about those things. But I do think that field-based work is an important part of the solution, and definitely I think more funds are going to come to that because it's clear that it's helping.
So Michael, as mayor, you engaged in these kinds of conversations, right? With how are we dealing with poverty, basic income, things that lead, you know, that can lead to homelessness. Can you talk a little bit about the basic income?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about a couple things, then we'll get to basic income.
Okay.
Well, I just want to underscore what you said about holy discontent. That's such a beautiful phrase, and what I'm going to take with me in terms of sort of the emotion of anger isn't bad, particularly when there's a lot of things to be angry about. So I just want to thank you for sharing that. And then the last comment I made, it talked about some of the perils of change, and I wanted to like underscore it and just say, but it's worth it. Right? Like I was sitting here thinking, I was like, I didn't just close the loop and say, despite all that, despite the fact that it's linear, it's difficult, it's not always highs, there's lows, it is so worth it. And it's worth it because, particularly for those of us in this room, the imperfect world we inherit is only more perfect than the world yesterday because someone sacrificed and thought of us. And someone thought about sort of, if not for me, maybe the next generation or the next generation after them could have a little more opportunity. And I think for me, that's why the work of servant leadership, particularly when you have a lot of privilege, particularly when you have a lot of access, I don't think it's optional. I don't think it's a choice. I think it's a necessity because that's the only way in which we've been able to occupy the spaces we have, get the degrees we have, and have the experience we have. It doesn't mean everyone has to be arrested. It doesn't mean everyone has to go out every day and work with our brothers and sisters in the street, but it does mean that everyone, and particularly everyone with the level of access and privilege you have, has a responsibility to do something in service of humanity with it. And still make your money, but make sure you're serving folks. And so in terms of your question, I think sort of part of the beauty and the challenge of being a mayor is that you're at the intersection of community level impact, but also thinking of scale. So you oftentimes, or I would oftentimes go out with our officers to do ride-alongs, or go out with our homeless unhoused individuals, providers, and go out but I'm scared of dogs. That's the only thing. So I couldn't.
Me too.
How do you do it then? I was in that whole time. Every time you talk, I'm like, she must like dogs.
No, I do. No, I like dogs I know.
Oh. Them Stockton unhoused dogs, they be real. So I couldn't go all the time. I would go when I needed to and be like, yo, you go first and tell me which tent doesn't have a dog. But no, so that was the challenge, right? And part of what I tried to do as mayor was think about, even if I couldn't solve the entire issue with the authority I had, could I at least create an imagination or an example or an inclination of what can happen? So that's what the basic income work was, where we gave, like way before the pandemic, way before my friend Andrew Yang was even running for president, we said we're going to give, learning from the work of Dr. King, which I read in Claiborne Carson's class as a freshman, we gave people $500 a month. And the idea was that the city was never going to do basic income. As a city, we just don't have the money. But the city could provide an example of what it could look like and then advocate for scale. So since then, started with one city, and now I lead a group called Mayors for Guaranteed Income. We have 75 mayors across the country, running 40 pilots, many of whom using government dollars. So now we have the city of LA, the county of LA, Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, Jackson, Mississippi, Tallahassee, Florida, Oakland, Long Beach, Compton, St. Paul, Minnesota. There's hella cities who are now doing basic income work, and some of that work informed the child tax credit discussion that was happening federally, et cetera. And for me, it was a good example that sometimes you have to start small. Like sometimes you have to start with just one neighborhood, or in Stockton's case, 125 people. And start, but the idea is start small, not stay small. But you have to start small. And I'll shut up after this, Jen, but one of my favorite things my grandma taught me was don't despise small beginnings. And I think particularly when you're at a place like Stanford, there's always this like idea that I'm going to be Mae Jameson or Jessica Watkins, or I'm going to be Senator Booker, or I'm going to be Vice President Harris, or I'm going to be, I mean, back in the day in 2008, Dr. Carson was still a cool dude, but now that's changed. But back then, people wanted to be like Ben Carson, believe it or not. But
I know you thought you were talking about Clay Carson. You're talking about Ben Carson.
Ben Carson.
Okay, right?
Ben Carson. But you have to start somewhere. And I think part of servant leadership is understanding that there's no hierarchy in roles, just different responsibilities. So sometimes part of servant leadership is picking up. Sometimes servant leadership is taking notes. Sometimes servant leadership is showing up a little bit early. Sometimes servant leadership is cleaning up afterwards. But I think that particularly for Stanford students, like starting small, because then you learn the lesson so that when you get to scale, you're able to handle it. You're able to be a good steward of it, because you don't want to start at scale and not have no skills, or start at scale and have no experience, because then you'll fail. So that wasn't an answer to it.
Would you like to repeat that last part you just said?
That's right there.
Yeah, the cleaning, the cleaning part, right? Yeah.
I'm speaking for, people.
Well, yeah, and you said in your opening remarks, but this idea that leadership isn't about intelligence, it isn't about talent, it isn't about how well you speak. Leadership is about verb, it's about what you do. And there's ways to exercise that in different ways. And I mean, like, when I was mayor, I remember when the biggest transitions to being mayor was that my folks wouldn't let me clean up anymore or set up anymore. 'Cause I was so used to it as a council member. I would put out the chairs. I would clean up afterwards. I was like always staying late to make sure all the trash was taken out. And then when I was mayor, they're like, you can't do that, you can't do that. I was like, why not? I can pick up trash. I was like, no, you gotta do something else. But I'm so thankful for those lessons, because it's given me an appreciation for the type of team you need to build to be successful. Because everyone can't have the mic, and everyone can't do the same things, but everyone does need to be appreciated, because leadership is also a team sport.
Okay. Another question. And after you, then we'll have you, okay?
Hello, my name is Michael Brown. I am a senior-ish studying African and African American studies with a minor in political science. Maybe I was a major too, but they lost me. But my question is really just, especially as a senior going through like grad school or like career options coming from Stanford, and as someone who like is from a first-gen low-income background, I feel like I've changed a lot. Like being at Stanford, I feel like even if you are, you know, from whatever marginalized communities, being here gives you a lot of privilege, and it changes the way that you understand the world and the way that you even use language. Like, you know, with my family at home, sometimes we don't really see the world in the same way, and I'm like, you know, not really able to use the same language to communicate ideas and then have it received in the way that it would in my mind. And so just thinking about the way that like privilege comes from being a Stanford, like the privilege that we get with that, and just like the way that we see the world differently, like how can we become more aware of that, more self-aware, and also thinking about like changing the world while you're also changing yourself and your morals and your principles and your goals.
Good question. I'll say something. And I think, is it Mariam? Mariam spoke on this during her intro. She said, you can change. People can change. And you have the right to change your mind and evolve. We're all evolving, especially people that come to a place like Stanford. We're pretty proactive people, you know, we're pretty growth oriented in general, you know, we want to do things. So we're evolving. And I think you just walk along the path that you're supposed to walk and do the change that you're supposed to make. And then when you feel ready to pivot, you do. It sounds simple, but that's kind of just how it is. Like, I'll speak for me. Yes, I've been doing work with the homeless for about 6 years. Will I always do this work? I don't know. Will I always have some sort of justice-oriented, mission-minded component of what I do? Yeah, probably, because that's kind of just ingrained in who I am. But it doesn't have to look the same for me. And I don't have to be stuck in, well, if I'm not doing the homeless work, am I even really, you know, helping anyone anymore? You know what I mean? The pressures we put on ourselves when we even start to do good work, and then we feel like, oh, now I'm known for this, and now I have to keep doing this, and I don't want to do this anymore, you know? So just like, I would just say, give yourself space to just not know, because we want to know. I still want to know. I'm speaking to myself, right? We want to know, and be flexible with your journey. That's not the answer, because we want the answer. We want to know, like, how do I exactly do this? But it's not like that at all. So thank you for your question, though. That's a really mature and like evolved question. Like he said, how do you impact and how do you make a change when you yourself are changing? Does anybody else?
Come on, Michael Brown.
Yeah, come on, Michael Brown. Moderate.
Okay, we got a question right here.
One question. On the privilege point, I think it's stuff, and not saying you're doing this is a general statement, but in general, I feel like we have to begin to learn to put purpose to privilege rather than just talking about it and apologizing for it. I remember in college, one of my friends in South Africa came up to me in the Apartheid Museum crying. He was like, I have so much white privilege. And I was like, you crying about is doing nothing to help me. Or like you have, like, put it to work. And I think in the biggest lesson for me going to Stockton, going back home, as I was like, I'm from here. What y'all talking about? They're like, no, it's different because you have different level of access. Like your emails get responded to differently because only you have Stanford privilege, you have authority, you have a title. It took me a while to realize and not feel like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, no, like that's a tool, use it. Like put purpose to your privilege and think about, okay. And Jan, you said this, I remember several times, but one time in particular, I remember you said that when you go into the room, you shouldn't be in there and be content just that you're there. That you need to be in that room and shake it up. And when you go into that room, you say you bring in all the experiences of all people you identify with and people you don't with you. And that's something, even as a sophomore, I remember listening and saying, that's right. Like if I'm gonna be in the room, if I'm gonna have all this privilege, instead of feeling bad about it, let me make it work for people and bring other people in with me. So I wanna thank you for the way you've mentored a whole generation of servant leaders at
Oh my
Stanford.
gosh.
So I know we have one question right here.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? My name is Matthew Yeltel. I graduated class of 2018. And when I was a freshman in the class of 2014, Gina was actually one of my mentors in the Stanford Native Immersion Program in 2014. And so my question for you, Gina, is that when we talk about servant leadership, one of the notions that always comes up is that those people that we serve are also our greatest teachers. And the work you do, I guess, you serve not just people, you also serve the land and everything that lives and grows in it.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about how the land itself has been your teacher. What are some of the most profound lessons that it's given you?
That's a beautiful question. And also, like, it's amazing to see, like, I knew them when they were freshmen and now they're the RFs, like, what? Like, it's amazing. But I'll answer that with a story. It's a really beautiful question. So I have like 3 part-time jobs to make things work. And one of them, I work for an archaeological consulting company as an ethnographer. So for cultural impact assessments, when a development is happening, I go in and I talk to mostly elders in the community about what they think about, you know, what does the land already have that's really special and should be preserved, but also what do you want to see happen, or do you not want to see this development happen, and making sure that they have their voices heard. So I got to go to Kauai, which is not my home island, but I got to go there and talk to an elder. And it was on, I don't know if any of you know Kauai, but Mana side by where Waimea Canyon is. So it's very dry. It was a hot, sunny day, and it was like just blue skies, very hot, and not a cloud in sight. And we did our interview. He was really amazing. He was talking a lot about ancestral presence on the landscape and how important it was that certain spots were not disturbed because they're kind of paths for for spirits to keep their path from sea to. It was a Hawaiian homelands development, so it was actually kind of an exciting, maybe a good development. But at the end of our interview, I'm kind of blah, but at the end of our interview, I was like, I feel like I need to thank him and the place and everything for the experience. And so I did a mele, which is a song of thanks to acknowledge that place and acknowledge the ancestors, everything that was happening. And right as I finished, it started to rain, like very softly, and it lasted for like 30 seconds. And I don't care if nobody else gets it, but like in that moment, it was like an acknowledgement, right? And the land will acknowledge us in those ways when we're doing things right. And so on that day, I went and I talked to 2 elders for building homes for Hawaiian people, right? Like it was a beautiful project, it was a beautiful day. And then at that final moment when it misted, right? And in the middle of nowhere. So I think the land itself acknowledges and speaks, and if you're listening, and so I think I use that example as like a moment of where I was like, I'm exactly where I need to be, like I'm doing the work that I need to be doing. And I've had several experiences. Part of our field work, we chant before we enter the place, right? Sometimes we only have our voices to give, right? And there will be things that happen if you don't do it, or if you do it right. And I know I sound like I'm crazy. But
No.
like,
No.
The land does acknowledge
No, we
you, and
didn't.
it is itself a teacher. And I do believe I've been studying Hawaiian medicine for the last two years, and since I've started doing that. But yeah, it all comes together in certain moments. So thank you for your question.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
I'm Elias. I'm a freshman studying CS, and I'm from Bethesda, Maryland. This is more towards Michael, but like to everybody. You talked about how we can like leverage our privilege, and it's like one battle to overcome feelings of shame in communities that don't necessarily have privilege. But then when you're at the table in industry, when you're working with people who, might be the active oppressors or active upholders of, the evil that we're trying to undo, how do you come to the table with compassion and empathy and still wield all that power and anger that we feel and direct it towards a place where we can actually get things done and bring people together who we might see no commonality with or even hostility with?
So when I was mayor, I had 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats on my city council. Most of the leaders of industry were Republicans, so I'm pretty conservative. So every day, and every hour, in every meeting was really an exercise, not just in restraint, but to the point you raised, Mike, but also around what language to use to kind of build the consensus needed to get things done. And I think part of it was an understanding. I think this may be the difference between like servant leadership and what is not real activism, but what some people call activism today. It's really about sort of the end goal and the notion that there's no permanent friends or even permanent enemies, there's just permanent issues. So taking things, and it's hard because people will say some crazy stuff behind closed doors, but always thinking about the bigger picture and always thinking about the folks I was trying to serve and always thinking about, okay, what's necessary to get to where we need to go. And I found, at least in the context I was in, speaking in terms of values, at least with my colleagues, could work. If I spoke to them in colloquialisms or ways that resonated with them and sort of what I thought their worldview was, I could get them to act. And it was also just channeling that anger, not to them, because if it's not them, be the person after them before, but to the system, to the policy, to the thing we're trying to fight. And that really helped me keep focused, because so much of the opposition was personal. Like, we don't like him, he's evil, he's this, he's that. And it really took me sort of elevating my thinking to be like, it's not about, I'm a vessel, so it's not about me and it's not about these folks. It's about this issue and how do I bring enough. But then also, I just learned you have to run with the coalition of the willing. Like, you're not gonna get everybody. So I would just get the 3 votes I need and keep it pushing. So I didn't have all 7 people love me, but I always make sure I have 3 people who love me. So whenever I need something done, we get it done. And then the last thing I'll say is part of it was also relationship building. So what I would do, particularly for people, like, I was the first Black mayor, and not because there was no other Black people ever in the city, but because there's like a lot of bias and anti-Blackness, et cetera. And I was also the youngest mayor ever of a city of that size. So I knew I had to build a relationship with these folks because they wouldn't trust me initially. Like, they weren't gonna treat, like, the title wasn't enough. Like just because I was the mayor, that don't mean they're going to listen. Like they would listen to somebody who else, someone who fits the archetype of mayor. So I spent a lot of time building relationship before I needed people. So that when I needed them, there was, again, back to trust, there was trust. So I like text them on their birthdays or their kids' birthdays, or I would like send them like silly jokes. Like people like when you're like bad, so I like send them stuff. Like someone would be speaking, I'm like, he know he can't fit that suit. Like stuff like that. But it built, and they, you know, because you're not supposed to be doing that on the diet, so everybody, they start laughing, then he brings trust, like, oh, that's right. So stuff like that. But I would also say, and I'll be quiet after this, but I'll also say, I learned so much from these crazy folks. Like I learned a whole different, like, the things they would jump to initially would be things I would never consider as an issue. And that was just interesting to me. Like I'm like, why do you think if we give people money they're gonna buy guns? Like of all the things they're gonna buy, like why? And it's like really trying to understand. And I'll end with a story. There was one guy who was a big developer who was very old. And one time he had me over his house, we were talking, and he asked me this question. I was 23 years old, I was on city council then. He asked me this question. He said, why don't black men want to be fathers? It was out of nowhere too. We talk about like some development stuff. He said, can I ask you a question? Anyway, so I had a decision to make, like in that moment. I was like, I can go off on this dude, like really go off. And he's canceled. But his money ain't gonna go nowhere. He's still gonna be influential in this city. So I said, all right, how can I go off, but in the way Stanford taught me in discussion sections? You know, because we say crazy stuff in sections too. So I, especially for the first year discussion sessions, you'd be like, what? Anyway, long story short, so I just asked a bunch of questions like, oh, do you think there's something different about me than you? Like my genes are different, so like I just don't want to be a father and you do? Like, wait. And he was like, I never thought about it that way. But long story short, he like became one of the biggest funders of a lot of the progressive things I did in the city. He was one of my biggest backers. He was like one of my biggest like translators to the folks in the city who were like, this dude's crazy. He's like, no, this is what he's trying to do. And it was really because in that moment, I took the extra labor of educating him, not because I wanted to, not because I needed to, but because for the goals I wanted to accomplish, I needed him to be a part. So that was a super long answer, but
It's a great answer.
So I was in a meeting last night, and I think some people in this room know that I said the clap back is not always necessary. It's just not. And the clap back causes more internal mental health labor than anything else. And so take these words because it's the goal. It's not self, it's the goal that you need to keep in mind. So with that being said, one, I want to thank you all so much.
It's so inspiring, thank you both. And I'm in LA now.
So I think, yep. So I think that.
To you guys. To Jan.
So I think that for me, what I want to say is that I began with my own ego. I was like, okay, I'm packing a room usually, right? This has been one of the best conversations of my career for students. I mean, the nuggets, and this is a hard bunch that I know some of these people in this room, okay? This has been amazing, and I am so thankful to the three of you willing to come back, willing to share, willing to be vulnerable, willing to be honest, that it is okay to change your mind. That is the one thing that you do have the beauty of, that some of us who are older didn't quite have that, but guess what? God ends up putting you where you need to be, okay? And so can't have a testimony without a test, okay? And I know some of y'all need to hear this right now, okay? So with that being said, I want to thank Stanford alumni for participating and being a part of this live stream. I also want to say to the National Black Alumni for the summit in 3 days, I cannot wait to see you. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you for being so supportive. Dr. Martin, we are forever in partnership. The Centers for Equity, Community, and Leadership are forever in partnership with you and the King Institute. So thank you for being with us tonight. So Miriam, hey, we cannot wait to see the next chapter for you. Cannot wait to see the next chapter. And what I will say is, Michael and I were kidding about this the other day, and I've said this to my students. I am the plug. The plug has happened tonight, okay? Because with these three, the three of you, but to this audience, to be able to connect with you, I'm forever, forever grateful for you all giving me the gift of you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and see, this is what happens when Jan is forgetting, right? So we have gifts for you. Karen, Native Center, if you would bring yours. And so we are presenting each of you with a Changemakers. So this is presented to you, but it says the Centers for Equity, Community, and Leadership thank each of you for your servant leadership, because that is who you are. So we thank you. And so for also, we have gifts from the Native American Center, Cultural Center here as well. And for everyone that is here, on these tables, Joaquin, I'll take these. If you could go set those up. On the tables, we have pictures of all three, and there's matting around it. We have pens. We want you, before you leave, to write notes of what this meant to you on each of their things, for them to be able to take this and remember this for, girl, I go for tears. I go for tears. I go for tears when I do something. So if you all please would do that. And with each of you, we do have this for you to take back home. And I can't wait for your sons and your daughter.
Watching.
They're watching. Hi.
5 and 8.
5 and 8, right?
Yeah.
And Anna, I know that you are watching as well. Anna Maleka Tubbs is watching. You guys got the books in Uj, so yeah, okay. I know you were watching, and well, I know your kids are asleep because y'all keep them to a schedule.
They're not really, they're supposed to be.
All right, exactly. So with that being said, you all please go and sign that, so this is a memory that they can take with them. And I thank you all once again for everything and you being here.